I've waited 26 years, but finally, I've experienced one of the video gaming industry's most elusive pieces of hardware. I've coveted this ever since I learned of its existence in 1997. It's a first-party add-on that was only released in Japan. It used chunky floppies to load games, and it was only on the market for a little over a year, by which point it was labelled a cataclysmic failure. Since so few of them were sold, it's now extremely difficult to get a hold of one. But now, over 2 decades later, the wait is finally over. Hello fellow gamers, and yes, I am of course talking about the 64DD. It was March of 1997. The Simpsons had just become the longest running cartoon in history, the Dolly the Sheep clone had been recently announced, and my folks had bought little 14-year-old me a launch day N64, complete with Super Mario 64. And, my god, I was totally absorbed in it. I lost hours upon hours playing what would turn out to be one of the most influential 3D video games of all time. In the same month, a little known publication called N64 magazine started appearing on store shelves in the UK. As the owner of a brand new launch N64, and also drawn in by the videotape stuck to the front of it, I, of course, snapped it up. Flicking through the pages, I was treated to previews of upcoming blockbuster titles, Star Fox 64 and The Legend of Zelda, 2 sequels to titles that I'd always wanted to play properly, but didn't have much of a chance to at the time. It was the Planet 64 section that really drew my attention though, where, on pages 16 and 17, there was an article about an official add-on that would make my brand spanking new 64-bit console even more powerful. The promise of new massive games, 8 times bigger than Super Mario 64, the potential of expanding existing games with new features, new customization options, and even the possibility of demo discs, was something that had my geeky young self all a-quiver. It was at that moment that I vowed to myself that I would, one day, be the proud owner of a 64DD. The what? I hear some of you say. If you haven't heard of the 64DD, let me quickly fill you in. The 64DD, or disk drive or dynamic drive depending on who you ask, is a disk drive add-on for the N64. It supported these proprietary floppy disks that had a capacity of 64 megabytes each. That in of itself doesn't sound all that impressive, but given the alternatives at the time for that generation, this had quite a bit of flexibility. Of the 64 meg this could hold, up to 38 meg of it could be written to by the player. That's the equivalent of over 1200 controller packs, and was something that couldn't be easily done with CDs at the time. The 64DD also included a real-time clock, and built-in font and audio libraries that future games could take advantage of. But since Nintendo repeatedly delayed it, many games touted for it ended up being released on cartridge instead. It never saw the light of day until December of '99, by which time general interest in it had waned. To put that into perspective, the 64DD eventually came out after Sony announced the PlayStation 2. So, yeah, it wasn't going to fare well, was it? As a result, it was only released in Japan. It only had 10 titles made for it, and it only remained on the market for a little over a year before it was abandoned, and its online service Randnet was cancelled altogether. So, as you can imagine, at the time I was somewhat disappointed. My dream of owning a 64DD had just faded into obscurity. So I got a PS2 instead. That dream, however, was rekindled when a friend of mine found one for me when they were on a short trip to Japan recently. They spotted it on their very last day there in a trader store in Akihabara. Fast forward to a week or so later and it was in my grubby little hands. This was the day that I finally had my very own 64DD, all thanks to a good old buddy of mine. And now that my 26-year-long dream has finally been realised, we can take a good closer look at this. The whole kit I got came with the drive itself, full set of manuals, modem cartridge, an expansion pack, and 5 of the 10 titles that ever released for the add-on. There were even a couple of newsletters and postcards included that had been sent out to Randnet subscribers at the time. The unit itself doesn't actually have a lot to show us. There's the front-loading drive slot for the floppy disks and a big solid eject button to the side, giving a satisfying mechanical whenever inserting or ejecting a disk. On the top there's the connector that attaches it to the base of the N64, and this curved groove sort of cut into the top. It seems like the perfect fit for an N64 controller cable, so it may have been put there for some future accessory that never got released. On the underside there are two screws that you turn to secure the 64DD to the console. The serial number can be found under here as well, and yes, it does match the one on the back of the manual. The body of the 64DD is shaped much like the N64 itself, with two pillars at the front, but besides a couple of vents on the sides, there's nothing else to this. You more or less just slap your N64 on the top and get right to it. Or at least you would in any of the NTSC regions. This wasn't going to have a cat in hell's chance of working on my PAL N64. Its lockout chip was going to make sure of that. So to go with the 64DD, I ordered myself a Japanese N64 on eBay to use with it. Having procured one, and while waiting for it to be delivered, curiosity got the better of me. What would happen if I tried my launch day PAL N64 with this thing? I decided to at least give it a try. I wasn't expecting much, but I really wondered what would happen. I first tried with them attached together with no cartridge in. I switched it on and nothing. Absolutely nothing happened. I tried again with the disc inserted. Again, absolutely diddly squat. The N64 itself worked perfectly fine though when I played most of my cartridge games. It was like the 64DD wasn't even there. Except there was one game I had that refused to boot while the 64DD was attached. F-Zero X. Trying to load up this PAL cartridge and I'd be met with a blank screen. What I find interesting is that F-Zero X does have an expansion kit disc for the 64DD, which only works with the Japanese copy of the game. So does this PAL game still have the code included to recognise a 64DD? I wonder. Given that the mere presence of a 64DD was going to stop some of my own cartridges from even working, it made sense to disconnect the two and wait for the Japanese console to arrive. And it didn't take long to arrive from Bonnie, Scotland. I was ready to dive into what I could do with the 64DD. Mounting the new Japanese N64 on top, I was able to confirm that it had survived its journey all the way from Japan. After correcting the time on the main screen, it was time to try some discs with it. Half of the entire 64DD catalogue came as part of this bundle, and I tried every single one of them. Well, all except the Mario Artist Communication Kit, that is. I didn't check this one out for two reasons. First of all, it's still sealed, and given the value of these discs, I'd feel kinda bad for opening this. Secondly, this disc strongly relies on the Randnet service that was shut down over 20 years ago. It was used to email your creations from other titles in the Mario Artist series, and well, given the service is no more, it seems even more pointless to break the seal on this. So with that out of the way, let's see what we can play on this. Let's kick off with quite possibly the most well-known disc for this, the F-Zero X expansion kit. It adds a whole bunch of extras to your existing F-Zero X game. Well, provided it's the Japanese version, that is. Having the disc in the drive adds 2 new cups to the game, with brand new courses that are absolutely tough as nails. So tough, I could barely make a dent on these. The game's soundtrack was improved as well by having the disc inserted. With the cartridge alone, you were only able to enjoy the in-game music in mono, but the disc brings with it full stereo versions of all of these awesome guitar licks. And it doesn't stop there. There's also a machine editor that lets you create your own vehicle that you can use on any course. You have the option to style its exterior, change colours, add decals, and also tweak its speed and handling amongst other things. It's really fulfilling taking to a track in F-Zero with your own vehicle and absolutely trouncing the competition. And there's the greatest addition of them all, the track editor. It gives you loads of options out of the gate, and supposedly it's very similar to the editor the game's developers used when originally creating tracks for this game. It's mind-boggling that, even back then, you could create your own race courses with sweeping bends and deadly jumps, loop-de-loops, tunnels and obstacles, all on your Nintendo 64. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, I did a live stream on Twitch showing off what the track editor was capable of. Now, granted, all the menus were in Japanese, so I had to point my phone at the screen quite a lot, but it was enough to get into the swing of things. Once you realise where everything is, it won't take long until you've made your very own custom F-Zero track. The F-Zero X expansion kit is a must-have if you're fortunate enough to have a 64DD, and it will be the first thing I show guests whenever they come round to visit. Next up is SimCity 64, and I think y'all can hazard a guess how this game works. Yep, it's another version of SimCity, a game that's been released on practically every platform up to this point. It's a city building game where you're left in charge to plan, build and run almost all aspects of a city. This version does include a couple of features that hadn't been seen in a SimCity game before though. You can view the city at night, for example, which is something that wasn't introduced into the main series of games until about 3 years later. You can also zoom all the way in and have a wander around your city. Seeing cars pass you by and stop to chat with the residents roaming the streets. Everything other than the pedestrians are rendered in 3D, and seeing your own city from this perspective is a really nice little feature. SimCity 64 seems to be a direct sequel to the SNES version from the early 90s, as both of them include Dr. Wright, an advisor that helps you out along the way. As you can imagine, as SimCity 64 only ever came out in Japan, all of the menus and dialogue are in Japanese. I did need to rely on Google Translate quite heavily to understand what was being asked of me, but at least the in-game icons down the side were pretty straightforward to understand. The game itself, it runs, well, kinda choppy, and I hear it runs even worse when your city has really expanded, but I suppose it doesn't need a high frame rate to be enjoyable. There was a surprise left on this disc though. The previous owner still had their city on the disc, from all the way back to July 2000, so I didn't need to start from scratch. It's funny though, isn't it? Being able to continue on from where the previous owner left off from 23 years ago. In summary though, there are better and easier versions of SimCity you can play today. As quirky as this one is, I don't think I'll be recommending this one. Mario Artist Polygon Studio is our disc of choice next, and it's very different from what we've looked at already. It's a 3D computer graphics editor that lets you design and render 3D models, and it was one of the final pillars in the Mario Artist series of discs. It was developed by Nichiman Graphics, the same peeps behind the software used to create games such as Super Mario 64. It was a very difficult disc to navigate though. I mean, I've seen footage of the software where someone built a jet fighter entirely in 3D, but I wasn't able to find anything like that. Maybe it's hidden away somewhere. Instead, I found an option where I was presented with entirely random 3D models that I could then manipulate. Different components could be moved, resized, rotated and retextured and what have you. Everything was also accompanied by this very strange music throughout. I do not know what Nintendo's composers were smoking when they came up with this. Once you have your 3D model, you could drop it into various different minigames. This one, for example, was a test to see how far you could yeet your model off the side of a cliff. You could also use your 3D model in a series of quick-fire minigames, where fast reactions and quick thinking are key. Say, this looks awfully familiar, doesn't it? If you thought that this looks remarkably like WarioWare, you'd be right. This is where the series originated. Really nice little bit of Nintendo history right there. I think, once I work out where everything is, I'll be able to enjoy this title a lot more. The last disc I wanted to take a look at was the Randnet Disk, though today its features are sadly extremely limited. Coming out 2 months after the 64DD release, it allowed users to get online, surf the web, send and receive emails, and get regular news updates from Nintendo. As the 64DD didn't include a built-in modem, the Randnet Disk made use of the modem adapter cartridge in order to get online. Now, that sounds crazy today, doesn't it? To think you needed to remove your game in order to plug in your modem to get connected to the internet. When I popped this disc into my 64DD, I found that the previous owner's details were still on there, email address and all. There weren't any messages to speak of though, the inbox was entirely empty. Trying to use the disc today is more or less pointless, as almost everything you do makes it try to go online, which is difficult when the Randnet service has been closed down for over 20 years now. However, I did learn recently that there's an ongoing project nicknamed Randnet Plus, which aims to bring back the missing Randnet features for anyone who owns a 64DD. You know, I think I might get in contact with them, see if they need a hand with testing or anything. So there we have it, a sneak peek into the 64DD, how it works and a select number of titles for it. I'm going to be keeping an eye out for more discs that I can get for this, namely Mario Artist Paint Studio with the mouse. I'm not going to try for a complete set though. A couple of these games are hideously expensive. But you know what? I don't need all the discs. I'm just absolutely stoked that I actually have the 64DD itself. A 26-year-long dream finally come true. And on that soppy note, I'm going to head off. So thanks very much for watching. Did you ever wonder about the 64DD? Are you one of the lucky sods who even got a hold of one? Let everyone know down below in the comments. And hey, while you're down there, a like for the video is always appreciated. And there's always that subscribe button if you want to hear more from me. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.